While we're waiting for some sign of a new Stargate show, we're really watching for Amazon's acquisition of MGM. This was announced back in May of 2021 that Amazon is buying MGM, and they're doing it specifically so that they can utilize MGM's existing IP. It's intellectual property like James Bond and Fargo and Vikings and Stargate. So it seems like once this acquisition is done, there's a really good chance that there's a new Stargate at the end of the road. But it's taking a while to get there. Now, it's taking a while, of course, because these big media mergers, they're subject to government regulation. So we're waiting to hear from the Federal Trade Commission in the United States and also from the European Union regulators to see if they're going to give a green light for Amazon's acquisition of MGM to go ahead. If that's the case, we're going to get Stargate, I think, probably sooner rather than later. But I wrote a longer article about this. If you're interested in the business side of things and the legal side of things, there's a link in the description below. But let's just talk through what's new this week and what I think it means for how far away a new Stargate announcement is going to be. So here's the full article on our website over at gateworld.net. There's a link to this story in the video description if you want to check it out and read the whole thing for yourself. It's, again, a bit of business analysis and legal armchair quarterbacking, to mix my metaphors. What's new here is a report from the news site The Information. And they say that a decision from the FTC as to whether or not the FTC is going to challenge Amazon's acquisition of MGM, that decision is coming very soon, in the next few weeks. And they are taking steps over at the FTC to prepare for a potential legal challenge to Amazon's acquisition of MGM Studios, including doing things like looking at hiring expert witnesses, so that if this does go to court, the FTC has their ducks lined up and they're ready to make their case. But the report says that the final decision on whether to bring legal action against the deal is currently split 2-2. There are 5 commissioners for the FTC, and the 5th one is not seated yet. The 5th and deciding vote belongs to the next commissioner. So it looks like we have a 2-2 split right now. I would think that a 2-2 split means that a legal challenge would not go forward, but what do I know? I'm not an expert on FTC antitrust proceedings. So the bottom line here is that the FTC is going to make a decision in the near future. The other piece that's happening very soon is over in the European Union, which has its own antitrust regulators. They've given themselves a preliminary deadline of March 15th to decide whether or not they want to stand in the way of the deal. 34 public interest groups so far have registered their objections to this merger happening. That includes a coalition of various labor unions. It also includes the Writers Guild of America West. They're opposed to Amazon owning MGM. Now, a key figure here in terms of the FTC's proceedings is the new chair. One of those 5 commissioners is Lina Khan. Khan has been a vocal opponent of major media mergers in the past. She's worked at an antitrust advocacy group. In fact, she's made it so clear over her career that she's no fan of Amazon and its business practices that last June, Amazon made a filing to ask Khan to officially recuse herself. The next section here has a bit of history about where we've come from over the course of the last 10 plus years, as Stargate has been by and large out of production. There's a little bit in here on Stargate Origins and on Brad Wright's new project that he's been working on now for a couple, 3 plus years, as he's trying to get a new Stargate show going. So here's the breakdown. Here's where I think this is going. There's 3 possibilities for how this could all shake out over the next few weeks. Number 1, the commissioners make known that they're opposed to this deal, but they let it go forward. They're not going to stand in the way. That is going to give us, obviously, the quickest closure where Amazon fully takes possession of MGM and its assets and can start making decisions and public announcements about what it's going to do, what it's going to put into production. Hopefully a new Stargate show. A second scenario would mean that the FTC would file a lawsuit against Amazon to send the merger to court. Here, the FTC doesn't get the final say, but it takes it to the courts, and it has to present its case to try and convince a judge that Amazon's ownership of MGM would in fact violate US antitrust law. This would extend the timetable for a potential new Stargate show greatly, by several months, if there was a case that had to wind its way through the courts and potentially to the appeals court. If the judge was convinced, then the deal is off. Amazon doesn't get to own MGM. MGM would remain independent, and its investors' ability to sell the company for north of $8 billion would be greatly diminished. Who knows what would happen with Stargate then? If MGM itself would go ahead and find a streaming partner and greenlight a new show, or if it would just keep kicking the can down the road, hoping to sell the company to somebody. Third and finally, of course, there could be a court case. The FTC could take Amazon to court, but lose. A judge could dismiss the case or ultimately just decide in Amazon's favor. That, I think, would be a good sign for Stargate, for us getting a new production in the works. But of course, it would still take longer. It would be many more months before we heard word about what Amazon was going to do with Stargate. If the FTC does take Amazon to court, it's got a pretty tough road. U.S. antitrust law, as it is currently written, requires evidence that a merger will result in harm to consumers, such as higher prices for the same goods, for example, due to there being less competition in the market. There's a pretty high bar, legally speaking, for the FTC to hit. That is not necessarily going to prevent them from going to court. They could decide to file a lawsuit just to sort of make a show of it, make Amazon's life as hard as possible, even that they know the deck is stacked against them. But that's what we're watching for. We're watching for that decision here in the next few weeks. Now, it's also noteworthy here that this merger deal, this acquisition, is pretty small potatoes compared to some that have recently gone through that are many, many, many times bigger. So in 2018, AT&T purchased Time Warner. That was more than $85 billion. That was more than 10 times the going price for an MGM these days. And then the following year, Disney acquired Fox's film and television business. That price tag was $71.3 billion. Again, many times more than the Amazon MGM deal. Both of those mergers went through. In one case, the Department of Justice did end up filing an antitrust lawsuit in the case of Time Warner, but AT&T won that case. It just made it take longer. The AT&T Time Warner deal took a total of 20 months from the time that it was announced until the last piece was in place and the deal was finished. Disney's acquisition of 21st Century Fox was over in 15 months. In that case, without an antitrust lawsuit. So we're not there yet. We're not quite to a year, not until this coming May, but a decision as to whether there's going to be a court battle, I think, is going to be the next piece. I know this stuff is only kind of tangentially related to Stargate, but the more I get into it and read about it and think about the future of MGM and its business in film and television, I get really interested in sort of the business side of things. So hopefully this interests you, and if it doesn't, you've probably already clicked away. Finally, here's a poll that we asked you recently on the channel. Once all of this is said and done, what do you hope Amazon will do first with the Stargate franchise after the acquisition of MGM is complete? No surprises here. 47% of you said you want a new ongoing television series. Coming in close behind at 41% is a movie to wrap up Atlantis or SGU. Give us some closure for those existing storylines. 5% of you said you're looking for a movie first to begin a new story. But this is surprising here. 5% of you want a total reboot of the franchise from scratch. What do you think about this? What do you want to see Amazon do first once the deal is done? Leave us a comment below, and while you're there, give this video a like. It really helps the channel to grow. So the bottom line is I think we're close. I think that we're just a few weeks away, if the reporting is right, we're just a few weeks away from finding out whether or not Amazon's acquisition of MGM is going to be challenged in court. If it does get challenged in court, it's going to take us a while before we get there, before we get to the deal being closed and new Stargate being announced. But based on this recent history, these recent major media acquisitions, it's pretty unlikely that if the FTC does choose to challenge the deal in court, it's unlikely that they're going to win. It would take a lot for Amazon to actually be thwarted in its attempt to acquire MGM. So we're coming up on a year from the announcement here in May. It's really just a matter of time. We're going to keep our ears to the ground and we'll let you know when we have new intel.